Greetings and welcome to the Modern Alchemist channel. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this is Ask an Alchemist. Today on Ask an Alchemist, we're going to hit some pretty deep waters. Someone's finally asked me the question that I've been waiting to answer, even though I didn't really know I was waiting to answer it. But once I got it, I was like, yeah, let's do this. The question is this. What do I think of time and time travel? I've mentioned time multiple times throughout various videos and classes. I've talked about seeing the world without time, and yet I've never actually been really specific. And so now it's time. It's time to talk about time and time travel and consciousness and see where it all takes us. So, are you ready? Let's begin.
Shall we begin? Let's begin now.
Okay, so first thing that we should do is lay some ground rules, and I want you to realize that all of the material that we will be discussing right now, this is based on my own practical experience in dealing with these topics. So I won't be able to point you necessarily in the appropriate directions other than to advise you to perhaps hit a few philosophy courses, and specifically those dealing with, mortality. I mean, it's appropriate for a guy, you hit 50 and you start thinking about, the clock, because there may be fewer days ahead of you than behind you, which makes you think about time. And in fact, I am convinced that to the members of the ultra-wealthy elite club, the only thing that is ever pressing on their mind, truly pressing, is time. How much do they have, and how much is left, and how much are they going to be able to use that time? And so conceptions of what time is and what it's about are really important. Because it will augment or alter your reality. I'm going to blow your mind when we're done here. I'm pretty sure. I've test-driven this concept. I haven't shared it really publicly with anyone because this is how I do my thing. This is how I work when I'm in a professional capacity. Reading tarot cards. I utilize that as a foundation. I explain to every one of my clients what I'm doing. And this is what I do every time I meditate. This is what I've been showing you in the last few episodes. And by the way, if you haven't had a chance to listen to the M.A.P, Human Alchemy and the Art of Thinking, you will need to do that before listening to this or observing this, watching this video. Because from this point forward now, I've given you a really, really, really big cornerstone in moving forward with your study into the real groundwork, okay? I consider everything that we talk about from that point forward as pure esoteric material. Everything prior to that, for me, has been kind of safe territory. I could talk about it, I felt comfortable with it because it's sort of like a museum curator explaining a display. So with regard to the Eye of Horus or the Eyes of Horus, we're going to have to talk about that again later. But for now, just realize that up until that point, I hadn't really just crossed a threshold and let you get an insight as to how my mind operates. This will really give you an insight as to what I've been thinking about. And because this is operational knowledge, for me it's the equivalent of telling you how to drive a car. Meaning that I know that this works because I've used it. It's going to take you time, and by time I mean it's going to take a period. It's going to take something that involves a lot of effort, because you're going to have to deprogram yourself from a lot of really intensive stuff that we've been taught. And with that, I think it's time that we start talking about time, and more specifically, let's hit time travel first. All right? So let's talk about time travel. All right, what is the one thing that is consistent in every time travel movie ever? All of them. The one thing that never, ever, ever changes. It's that the Earth is stationary. In every time travel story, they actually never, ever talk about the fact that the Earth is engaged in a cosmic transit. This alone is sufficient for us to say that there is no technology that we could possibly imagine at this point that could facilitate time travel. Why? Well, because you're not just moving through a sequence of events, a chronological sequence of events which are happening universally. This is the definition of time, right? That we're looking at things that are unfolding, and they unfold in sequence, cause to effect, and that sequence can be counted by other sequences, by observing, its relationship to other sequences. That's time as we're defining it. Now, physicists, theoretical physicists, yes, there's the theoretical physicists. These guys are visualizing time as a component of three-dimensional space, and for their equations to work, they're math magic, that space then can be warped or folded or manipulated in some way outside of the framework of the three dimensions that we inhabit in order for you to then have transit. And you can create wormholes and any number of other kind of gateways or portals. All of this involving machinery and none of this taking into account that the universe is in motion. That's the thing, see, because when you're looking at time travel, you've got to take a look at it from the standpoint that the Earth is rotating. Now they'll account for that because they'll say it's this day, and they'll even account for the Earth rotating around the Sun. That is the end of their time equation. Even with Star Trek, you know, the Enterprise slingshotting around the Sun to get back to essentially a stationary object. But when you realize that that object is moving like this in a spiral, a vortex, through space, and it's following something else that's also moving in a vortex, which is our star, which is moving its way around the galactic rim, and the galaxy filled with hundreds of billions of stars are also moving, and that the galaxy itself is moving within the local group, and that the local group is moving within a larger framework. All of this has to be calculated into your time travel equation, because you're moving to catch up with where you used to be. Yeah. So, do I think that conventional time travel, in answer to the question, part whatever, is possible? No, not as described. There's no H.G. Wells machine that can take you 40,000 years forward or backward. There's nothing that can move you to the very first moments of the creation of the universe according to Big Bang cosmology, because you don't know where that happened. So you can't get there because you don't know where it happened. And since, according to standard model physics, the universe is effectively inert, other than, you know, because everything is just acting on its own, the stars burning up its fuel. I mean, in terms of stellar physics, slight segue here, but just in terms of looking at stellar physics as described by the standard model, we literally have not moved out of the Stone Age, because we're still describing the sun as a big hot burning fire in the sky. Except for now it's a nuclear fire, but it might as well be a campfire of the gods. It's the same thing. It loses all of its macht, its strength, its potency as a describing cosmology, because it's so obviously transparent. And with regard to time travel, it's the same exact thing. So there is no machine that could move back that way. There's no physical way to fold time-space to get you back that way, because you don't know where that way used to be. Get it? You're not really sure, because everything else is moving, and if you've ever navigated, like if you've ever been trained in navigation, you need several fixed objects around you to calculate where you are right now. And without that, then you need to use stellar fixed objects, which we use constellations and things, to determine where and when we are. So, all of that aside, so no machine that we know or could imagine could achieve this. So all of you conspiracy theorists out there who are worried about time travelers moving forward and backward and changing history like you see on TV, poppycock. Pure crap. No, I'm sorry. I'll go on the record here and say those are super fun to watch until you take a moment and recognize what time is. Now, with that said, so we've talked about time travel, let's talk about what time is, shall we? Okay, so let's talk about time, and I'm going to continue refuting the standard model as we do, by virtue of articulating certain definitions, okay? Specifically, when we look at time, let's visualize it from the standpoint of this mind experiment. This is something that I often use as a helpful means of explaining how time actually functions, okay? And what it is that we are perceiving in the sequential evolution of events that we then call time. I drew this analogy, actually, I revised and perfected what I considered was already a pretty good analogy. It's the water faucet analogy. If you've had a physics course, you've probably heard of this one, where it's the water faucet. But anyway, you can look it up. I prefer using a gumball and gumball machines. That you have a gumball machine which is infinite capacity, because I'm God and I made it. and this is my universe and my experiment. So we're going to use gumballs. Plus, the other reason why I like gumballs is because a gumball dispensed is just a gumball, and if you cut it in half, it's no longer a gumball, it's half a gumball, right? Whereas a water droplet is always a water droplet, no matter how many times you devise it. The water droplet is going to remain a droplet of water. It's just a smaller droplet, and so you kind of lose an element in the analogy. You gain something, but you lose something. I'm going to keep it as a gumball. That makes it easier for you to visualize, all right? So here we are, you and me. We're in a universe. There's nothing in it but just the two of us, or maybe just you, and because I don't want to confuse things. So you're in the universe all by yourself, and suddenly in front of you pops out a gumball machine. And it's very nice, full of colorful gumballs. And periodically, a gumball dispenses. And then after a while, another gumball dispenses, and it keeps doing this. Could you tell me how much time had elapsed between the dispensation, each gumball being dispensed? You can't. Now, you have to ask yourself, why is this? Well, time is not a dimension. In spite of what everyone in the physics, the consensus science physics community would have you believe, and which is regularly broadcast on Discovery and science channels and anything else that wants to talk about time, time is not a dimension. Dimensions are measurable. Time is immeasurable. What I mean by that is, you can't put time into a container and measure its volume. You can't put it on a table and measure its length. You can't walk around a contained volume of time and measure its circumference or its area. Those are things that are left to the three dimensions, and you can only measure things here, okay? So without the capacity to measure time, we have to evaluate then, how is time evaluated? What is exactly happening then if it is not measurable? Time is counted. And time is counted in sequence of events. So let's go back to our gumball machine. There's just one right now. And periodically, a singular gumball pops out. Now, I pop another gumball machine in there, and for every single gumball the first machine pops out, 12 gumballs pop out of the other machine. Now, at this point, we at least can determine a ratio. Even though we can't really say so much time has passed, we can say that for every one gumball here, 12 gumballs dispense over here. So I pop a third one in, and for every one gumball coming out of the second machine, 30 gumballs come out of the third machine. So now I have one gumball coming out of here, 12 gumballs coming out of there, 30 gumballs coming out of there for every one of this one over here, right? So, which of course then by the time you get down to the end, you're getting a whole bunch of gumballs, right? which are just disappearing or going someplace, doesn't matter. They're just accumulating. Gumballs are just piling up everywhere, but there's plenty of room because it's an infinite universe. Anyway, as I keep populating the universe with gumball machines, and they're all doing their thing, right? Then the one following the third one, which has the 30 dispensing, then it itself is dispensing 24 gumballs for every one gumball that's dispensed out of the 30, right? And then the 24 one on the fourth one, it's dispensing, let's say, 60 gumballs for every one of the 24. Now you're starting to see that I'm creating a clock for us, right? Because by the time that we work our way down, this analogy provides us something that can be felt as a year, it can be felt as months, it can be felt as days, it can be felt as hours, and it can be felt as seconds, okay? And we can tell time. Well, guess what? We do exactly the same thing right now when we're trying to tell time. We're looking at a sequence of events unfold. So a year is us moving once around our little gumball, the planet Earth, moving one rotation around the sun. And then, of course, the 12, that would be each segment then is 1 point within the zodiac, right? Because we've determined there's 12 constellations, which are, four that are 3 fixed, 3 mutable, and 3 cardinal, right? Or 4, whatever. Anyway, you get the idea. So it's built on the same idea, and then of course as we move our way down, that idea is then developed on geometries based on the globe that we're sitting on, right? So there you have time But none of that is measurable. It's always counted. We might say we measure time, but we're being poetic, okay? Because we're imagining ourselves as Clotho, right? As she's stretching out the thread of one's fate and snipping it off, right? She's measuring the life of a human being. That's not how it works, though. So, if time then is the just observing things, and if there's no observer, then there's no time, and if there's nothing in the universe, there is no time. What can we learn from this? Well, the first thing we can learn is our association with how time is tied to Saturn. The Kabbalah saves the day here because we know that Saturn is tied to Binah, and Binah is the first expression of materiality after Chokmah is pumping in energy, spirit, into the universe. It condenses and solidifies in Binah, and it becomes the universe as we see it. Without gumball machines, there's no time, which means without things dispensing and moving and interacting with each other, there is no time. Without Binah condensing all of that spirit matter into matter, right? That interacts with each other and is moved by the force of this constant inflow of energy moving into it and making things perpetuate in motion. Without that, there's no time. It's just an infinite expanse of eternity. And eternity is big. Eternity will make your head go if you really work on it, because you can't possibly imagine it. To me, it is the equivalent of being a flea on the back of a dog that's racing after a frisbee into the ocean and trying to contemplate the totality of all of the water on the planet Earth as the flea on the back of the dog in the ocean. That's the syllogism I would have for you as a comparative analogy of what it's like for a human being in our minimal finite existence to try to interpret what eternity is, other than it's more and it's really big. So now that we understand that time travel is conventionally taught is not possible, is a fantasy, and now that we understand how time operates, we have to ask ourselves then, what is it? What is it that is creating this fabric? What is it that we are experiencing? Because if we're not actually experiencing time and from moment to moment, then what is it that is taking place? All right, so the resolution to this actually is pretty simple. The thing that we are experiencing then is consciousness, and we are experiencing consciousness and its flow. Now, how does this relate to time? It comes down to the concept of the I. And remember, I told you that if you didn't listen to that podcast on human alchemy and the art of thinking, you're going to miss out a big component here, because I'm not going to redefine terms for you. I'm just going to start talking. So, good time to bone up on that. Specifically, we're going to talk about the subjective self. The subjective self is the material component of you, this, that is cobbled together under the working effort of Binah and the Kabbalah, right, under Saturn. I'm going to tell you anyway. So it relates then, remember, I talked about it being your personal challenge, your adversary, how it becomes Satan because of the definition of what Satan is. But we didn't talk about it in relation to how it defines time. We've talked about time from the standpoint of using a machine. We've talked about it as being immeasurable, meaning you can't contain it, you can't measure it, you can't walk around it. We didn't talk about where all this idea came from, because this is new. relative to how we've thought about time on planet Earth, especially how our ancestors thought about time, these ideas are actually really, really new, as in the last couple hundred years. Prior to that, conceptions of time were dramatically different. In fact, it was considered a valuable asset among the Greeks to procrastinate, because that meant that you were taking the necessary period of time to cognate, to put your thoughts together, and then you'd express them in a burst, kind of like this. So today, of course, because we've developed a clock, and that clock is on the wall, and it's always sitting there going, hey, you're not moving fast enough, we have a sense of urgency. And that we need to move on, and procrastination is considered something that's bad because you're wasting time. I can see it just elapse right in front of me. It's just going away. and you're not doing anything. Why not? So that's the idea that we have today. And it's really interesting because as a component of my degree in business, my instructors in international business regularly would counsel us to reevaluate how we felt about the passage of time when dealing with people from other cultures, because to the Western mind, this meeting might be taking just a tad too long and I have things to do, and to them it just began. Or to the Western mind, do we really have to have this many courses with our meal, because this meal is taking perhaps a bit too long and I have things to do, whereas that's how they get to know you, you know? To the Western mind, there's a lot of things that we consider a waste, and this idea has migrated out and infected all of us, when the truth is that you should savor moment for moment and appreciate whatever it is you're doing. But you can only do that if you recognize that your perception of time is your perception of something greater. And what is it? What is it that we're perceiving? If not the flow of events, right? This linear sequential flow of events, then what is it that we are experiencing? Well, the resolution to this question is found within those 7 esoteric principles, specifically the first one, mentalism. Mentalism states that the all is mind, which means that everything that we're looking at is consciousness. It's built on consciousness. And of course, under Kabbalah, we understand that consciousness manifests in Keter, and then from Keter it descends into Chokmah, and from Chokmah it booms into Binah, where Binah is like, stop, and forms it into things, and then we have it. And in fact, this activity, this flow, this is where Saturn becomes tied to time, because it is all this material that's being stopped and gelled and put into place. This is the definition of time, because without the gumball machines, right, there would be no way to calculate a sequence of events based on measurable ratios, countable ratios, that when this happened, then this would happen, and when this happened, these things also happened, and then you could gauge it upwards or downwards to give you a sequence of time. So, if time, then, is not measurable, if time is not containable, if it's unfolding, then literally the only thing that is analogous to it is thought, right? You can't measure a thought, you can't contain a thought, maybe up here somewhere. But you really can't contain a thought, you can't weigh it, although some thoughts might feel heavy. It can only be perceived. It can only be experienced, and then it's gone. It comes and it goes. And this then gives you your tool. This gives you the device wherewith to navigate through the conscious states which are unfolding around you, and to have a measure or degree of potency when engaging in those realms. What I'm talking about specifically is in the episode Human Alchemy and the Art of Thinking, by the time we finish that, the subjective self is pretty much villainized, right? It's Satan, it's evil, it causes you to do all sorts of stuff, it clearly has its own conscious awareness, and the subjective self is this corpus that you're housed in. And I go at great length describing that, and describing what that experience feels like for all of us, and giving us language wherewith we can then articulate what it is that we're experiencing, which gives you power, right? If you're inarticulate, you're impotent, you can't get it out, and then it just makes you want to burst, right? Because you can't get it out. Giving you language to describe things allows you to actually do things. What I'm going to show you now, what I'm going to share with you now is stuff that I've not read anywhere, okay? This is, you always ask me, where have I read this? You guys, this is what you do after you've been reading all the basics, okay? This is where you go after, this is what you can see when you stand on the shoulders of giants. All that other stuff, that's exoteric knowledge. All the stuff that you can find in publication, it's exoteric knowledge. The stuff that's esoteric, the deep stuff, that stuff doesn't come that way. And I've never actually read anyone who has described time in this way. There's only one instance I can think of off the top of my head that actually hit it as I perceived it. And at the time when I saw that movie, I got all weepy because I said they got it right. And that's Arrival. And so let me describe for you what it is that they tried to describe and how time functions, because time then is a function of consciousness. The way to evaluate time then as a function of consciousness is this. You look, as I've advised previously, you go to nature and you say, okay, where is the source point of immediate consciousness? If I know that consciousness is an expression of electromagnetism, and that electromagnetism, electricity, but electromagnetism as the whole, okay, because it's a big package, that electromagnetic outflow then can stimulate conscious states, okay? The largest immediate source of electromagnetism is the sun. That's it. It's the biggest one because it's perpetuating everything that's going on in the solar system. Without the star doing its thing, everything else would stop doing their thing in short order. Okay, and there'd be like lots of dying. So that then is the most immediate source point of consciousness, because we understand from an electric universe standpoint that that source point of consciousness flows like vines or lines that spiral and bend around each other. They're called Birkeland currents, and that when those currents pull together into a little knot, you get a little Z-pinch, and that Z-pinch then can, boom, turn into a star. Or maybe a plasmoid that turns into a geode somewhere, right? Or it can turn into any number of things, but the pattern is always the same, whether it's a big star or a small piece of fruit hanging on a tree or a nut or people or cells. It always uses exactly the same electromagnetic flow, and when you dial in on how that works, you have a big window into how everything else operates, including your mind and the conscious flow of your thoughts. So I like to go to trees as an immediate expression of how this works. Any plant will do, but trees have these beautiful rings that if you see one that's been cut down around your place where you live, you can look at it and go, okay, I got the idea that here is a series of rings, and that those rings are coaxial, meaning that they function together. They sit together, but those rings actually are representing a flow of smart fluid, which is carrying nutrients from the ground up, like minerals, and sugars from the top down. So the xylem's moving the sugars down, and the phloem's moving the minerals and stuff up, and each of those, are exchanging, and they spiral past each other as they move up and down the tree. This flow of energy then mirrors the flow of consciousness in the universe. It all flows the same way. Our vascular system flows the same way, right? Where arterial blood moves one way and vascular blood moves the other. And by understanding that one has a lot of force and the other one is a bit more passive, but both are essential or the organism dies, right? If you can't evacuate the bad blood and exchange it for new blood, or oxygenated blood in that case, then the organism dies, right? If hypoxia happens. So in the same concept then, when looking at consciousness, because everything is everything. It's always the same pattern, and it's 50 bazillion trillion quadrillion variations on this, but it's always the same pattern. It doesn't matter. And so visualize then your conscious state as having an overconscious state and an underconscious state. This should sound familiar to you because if you've had a basic psychiatry course or psychology course, you'll know that Freud said that we had a subconscious state, and Carl Jung said that we had an unconscious state. But they're still looking at this from the same way that I'm looking at it, except for I'm using plants and biology as a descriptive for the flow of that consciousness, okay? I'm trying to give it something because I see the pattern in all things. It doesn't matter where you go. In the case here, our overconscious state could be considered, if you're looking at the tree, the outer bark. And this is that part that protects the tree, right? And you could move in one layer perhaps. The underconscious state represents the part that's beneath that, supporting and helping with the transit of fluids. If you dig farther into the tree, you'll find that all the stuff in the very center is now just structure. It's like everything in consciousness then builds outwardly in spheres or in columns outwardly from the center. But it always has an overconscious state, which is here, and then just beneath that there's an underconscious state. And they're flowing coaxially, just like in a tree, where one state of consciousness is moving up and the other state of consciousness is moving down. Now, or rather, we could turn the tree on its side. That's better, so that it's moving one way or another, and it doesn't matter if it's left or right. We're not going to get into that. I'm just trying to get you this idea of consciousness moving. Now, when we perceive overconscious states, that's always perceived in an analog fashion. So the best way to view that is to imagine the ticking hand of a clock or the second hand moving because this is how we feel. This is how we sequence it. This is what we experience when our eyes are open and we're here, right? When we're in the underconscious state, things are experienced digitally. This is because the overconscious state is still evaluating what's being experienced in an underconscious state. It's like giving its impression, which is why you can wake from a dream or why you can be woken up by things going on out here, even though the dream could be very involving, right? So, or you'd really want to stay in that dream. It doesn't matter because someone's shaking you to get up because it's time to go to work. So much for your dream. In the underconscious state, the reason I say it's described digitally is because it's like watching a slide projector, and instead of going forward in sequence, cause to effect, it's reversed, and it's effect to cause. Which is why when you're reading in scripture or you're reading in any kind of prophetic writing, a prophet's never giving you a sequence of events. And this is why it's always confusing to read prophecy, because they're seeing the slides and they're like, okay, I see a lion and it's got all this stuff going on, and I see this virgin over here, or I see all these guys and there's this dragon doing its thing. But when you analyze the description, they're not giving you motion. Like in the analogy of the woman with the dragon in Revelation, the description is, I see a woman ready to give birth, and there's a dragon ready to eat the child as it comes out. It's snapshot. Snapshot. Nothing. You don't get to the idea what happened. Snapshot. And it's because the mind is trying to regulate its interpretation, and so it sees things in this timeless snapshot state, and it works its way backwards. So you can do this. You can do this. You just have to be aware of it. Now, There are all sorts of other things that apply itself to the unconscious state. Advertisers take advantage of it and have demonstrated that conscious states, the waking overconscious state, can be heavily triggered by the underconscious awareness. So just as the overconsciousness is aware of itself and the underconscious state that it's dreaming, right? It can become aware that it's dreaming, that it's participating in the dream. The underconscious state is aware, at least dimly aware, or the conscious, I don't know, you can't really tell if the other side's watching, right? But you definitely know that it's there because there are all sorts of subliminal triggers, which are designed to take advantage of that. Advertising uses that all the time because the underconscious state is evaluating a number of things simultaneously at the same time that we're awake. So, when they're working together, they can work both directions. In the movie Arrival, you get to see exactly that when she'd pop into a momentary meditative trance, and then her mind would move forward to points that she hadn't experienced yet. Forward to raising her child, watching her child pass away, forward to a very important dinner with the Chinese Prime Minister, like these, informing her of things that she hadn't been aware of yet, but was necessary. And of course, this brings up, predeterminism and a whole bunch of other stuff that make people freak out because they're really attached to our idea of what it's like to have free will. But I tend to stick with the oracle on this one from the Matrix.
So it's really up to you. Just have to make up your own damn mind to either accept what I'm going to tell you or reject it. Candy?
You already know if I'm going to take it?
Wouldn't be much of an oracle if I didn't.
But if you already know, how can I make a choice?
Because you didn't come here to make the choice. You've already made it. You're here to try to understand why you made it. I thought you'd have figured that out by now.
Which brings me now to the subjective self and helping you understand your interpretation of time a bit better. Imagine now that this coaxial flow is like fabric, like a napkin, and it's twisting and turning on itself, and around the napkin is a little napkin ring. Now the reason why I use a napkin ring, and this napkin ring is moving forward and backward along the length of this fabric, okay? The reason I use the idea of a ring is because it brings me to the idea of the eye. We're going to talk a lot more about what an eye is, okay? A lot more. But for now, remember that the eye, as I talk about in that podcast, the eye is the subjective self. The eye is the physical lens through which things are perceived. It is the point through which consciousness is interpreted in the moment. So, I am here. I feel happy. I feel sad. I feel energetic. I feel tired. I am this ring that is experiencing the flow of consciousness. The eyeball, the eye in the head of the person or animal or what have you, the eye sees nothing. The eye is simply a transit point through which electromagnetism is gathered and collected in the rods and cones in the back of the retina, and then transmitted, once they've somehow or another magically been changed, along the visual cortex, or along the optical ganglia through the visual cortex in the back of the head, and then we imagine what it is that we're seeing, But the eye itself, it's just an aperture, it's an opening, it's the point through which other things flow. And it's an apt description of what it is that we experience. So the eye, as that ring moving on the napkin, remember the napkin's infinitely long, and there are two napkins that are wrapped on top of each other, right? So they're like this, they're flowing, one spinning one way and the other spinning the other way. That eye then is capable of interpreting what is being experienced in the moment. And it becomes your lens, it becomes it's the anchor, so that as you project your mind forward or backward through the periods that are available to human consciousness, you are able to see and in some way experience a time that you have not yet perhaps had physical contact with. For me, it works. It's very difficult to explain this because you're getting an insight into how I process, how I've come to see the flow of consciousness, and it's quite a bit different because. A cautionary note to those of you who are quite adept at your meditation as you endeavor to unwrap this nut, this knot that I've given you, this little Gordian knot, crack this nut. You're going to find that this will alter your conscious process a great deal, because it then brings to mind other things. What it does is it brings to mind, can I know a thing that I haven't actually learned yet, but will likely learn in the future? This is based largely on the logic of human propensity, and by that I mean that if you are likely, let's say, to be a scientist who's studying chemistry or some sort of thing, or me, a symbologist, right? Studying a series of symbols, is it possible that you can, because you know that you're probably going to do that for the next 10 years or longer or whatever the rest of your life, can you navigate with your other self or with yourself to go to a different location in order to apprehend that information? And my experience has been yes. Yes, you can. But again, it requires honesty. You know, I'm not gonna become a rocket scientist overnight, if you know what I mean. Because my focus isn't in rocket science. My focus is in archaeology and anthropology and symbols. So that's my focus, which means that if I apply myself in meditation towards unraveling certain things which may not be available in print, but are available because other people have experienced or know them, and because I understand that my underconscious state is tied to something that Carl Jung would describe as a collective conscious state, and that my overconscious state it represents the dualistic opposite of my total conscious state. So where the underconscious state is collective, meaning we all share the same dream space, my overconscious state is individual. So I am the one and the many, and so are you. And so that means that if other people have experienced a certain thing, that I am wired to be able to experience that. Now, we already know, just by contemporary neurological science, that we are built with mirror neurons, right? So that if I physically watch another human being get smashed in the head with something, I'm like, oh man, like I can feel it. Or if I watch someone smash their thumb with a hammer, I'm like, oh man, that had to hurt. Now, you can almost cringe with feeling that. If you see the nail split or something, you're like, you know, that image sits there and you feel it. Well, that feeling, there's nothing to feel there, folks. That's just words. I'm just describing things. But I know there are some of you out there that have either worked in carpentry and smashed their hand like I've done, and so you know what that feels like, and you have only to hear about it to know what that feels like again. And if you've not, you just only need to see someone smash themselves really good to have an idea of what that feels like. We call it empathy, but it's mirror neurons as opposed to, you know, within regular neurological science. And so we're physically wired to do that. I believe that physical wiring mirrors a higher order of wiring, that we are connected, and we're connected through conscious state, waking over consciousness or slumbering under consciousness. And by being able to tap into those things, you should be able to tap into greater depths of knowledge. Now, here's the thing that I've experienced. It's way easier to go backwards than forwards. I can't explain why that is, but my experience has been that and the farther backwards, the more deeply established something is, the easier it is to experience it or see it or learn it. The farther forward you get, I think it's because the waking conscious state, because it's all the subjective self. The subjective self feels its way through everything, and so when looking forward, the subjective self is giving you its feelings, its impressions of what's going to happen. Breaking it into the entire, like, subjective, middle, and objective self, so that you can kind of get a sense of how that works into this. The objective self is like the fabric of the napkin. The middle self is where you decide to put the ring, and the subjective self is in fact the ring on the napkin. And its feelings about the napkin and the experience. So you can use that feeling, by the way, once you've managed to subjugate the subjective self, make the subjective self behave. Its feelings can be trained to be quite accurate, so that a person who is able to identify the feeling of a thing without policing themselves into judgment. In other words, this is how I feel, and then allow the other aspects of consciousness to move in and communicate with that, will give you a better impression of what it is that you're experiencing or learning. So there you have it. That's a lot to take in. I'm going to work with these ideas more in the future in sharing them with you, but I wanted to address what it was and answer this question because it was super fun, and basically go on record and say, hey, this is what works. This is what has worked for me. You can, from this point, draw additional insight. You can take this into what my feelings are regarding astral projection, because that to me seems to be again, it's the ring, the positionality of the ring and the napkin. When you realize that we're all connected, then you can move to any point with anyone, because there's no separation other than what you think is perceived as separation. But that perception is generated by the subjective self in a waking overconscious state that thinks it is it, and so it treats the totality of consciousness like an ant on the bark of a tree, and that it is something that is to be moved up and down upon, rather than recognize that you are the tree, and that you are a component of the total consciousness within the universe, expressing itself in a dualistic fashion, in a waking overconscious state and a slumbering underconscious state that's spiraling and happening both directions at the same time, concurrently. And that those things are being interpreted through you, your I. So that's it. That's it. That's time. That's time travel. That's at least what works for me. Yeah, that's what works for me. Everything that I'm going to be sharing with you guys I've shared all the stuff, but we've reached a point that, the comfort zone is gone now, and anything that really is of value that I want to share is this kind of stuff that really you can take and use. I'd be excited to see what some of you think after you've tried some of this out and abandoned traditional conceptions of time and adopt something a bit more ancient, adopt something that, because I'm not the first one to observe this? Heck no. Yeah, I'm super genius. That's me. Oh my God. No, I'm certain that this is something that's been observed and probably very likely is well known and understood among select groups on this planet even today. I'm absolutely certain of it because that's where I learn, you know. I mean, you go where the knowledge is, and if you learn how to navigate through the fields of conscious states, you begin to learn that there's a lot of fun and exciting things out there that the universe is comprised of, and many of them involve human beings who've thought some very awesome thoughts. And one has to only look at what they looked at. Look at the world around you. You know, I always joke and I say, I don't have a gazillion-dollar laboratory to conduct my electrical experiences in, or experiments in. Instead, and I don't even have a garage really. So I have to go outside and look at electricity in kind of a more static expression. And for me, that's just looking at plants. And studying how they operate and grow and how they express, and then look at that and say, well, wow, I have a similar function in myself, and then look at how that grows and functions and expresses itself, and then take that to the next level. That's what you got to do. And with regard to those of you, you know, I mean, you can take this now, this idea, and consider concepts of reincarnation from perhaps a different standpoint. That you might be experiencing something that exists within your bloodline. And that brings me to the final thing. This is the final, maybe, discussion here on time. And that is the importance of ancestral consciousness and bloodline. Historically, wiping a family out so that there would be no one left, it's always rather significant when you think about it, but I believe the purpose of that was then to truncate a consciousness from the universe itself, to just say, there will be no more of you from this point forward, no more. Your bloodline is gone. Well, why would that be important? Why would it be important to link yourself by your blood to another human being? How is that a thing, and how does that become an esoteric thing? Bloodline then means that you have a direct link inside your body through your blood with all those who went before you. It starts with your parents and then it works all the way down through your bloodline. The farther back you go, for most of us, the more dispersed the bloodline becomes, right? Because unlike anciently, you know, there's not a whole lot of this intermarrying going on with modern people today. There's a lot of breadth and scope in our marital choices in the modern era. Anciently, that wasn't always the case. However, among royals in very ancient times, incest was often practiced. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why, you know, other than, you know, to keep it in the family, right, to keep the power in the family, could there actually be an esoteric reason for this? I think there was. I think that those people were trying to refine and maintain a really pure connection, at least to their ancestors, to have a clearer idea of what they thought, so that they would be able to access that information even today. Right, because their blood is not so distilled as or disperse. Their bloodline isn't so dispersed as they are today. We literally, when looking at like the vision of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar's dream, we literally today at this point, we're at that feet of clay thing where it's just little bits of minerals mixed in with everything else. And if you've ever worked with clay, you understand that its mineral nature is the result of greater elements having been broken down over periods of time and left there. So that's us. That's us trying to work backwards, but definitely it is always easier to work backwards. Which I think is why you see so much ancestral worship throughout the rest of the world, right? Because there seems to be an overconscious state connection to everything that is material. And the underconscious state connection can exceed or go beyond that, right? So the overconscious state is the I, the single me, which has a bloodline that ties it. The underconscious state is the all, it's me and you and everyone else, and we're all in it together, sharing that conscious experience as a unified body of consciousness. So, so that's that. Yeah, that's a lot to take in, and I hope I've been able to address this as well as I can. I want to get on to other projects and give you guys some more stuff, so I'm hoping that this is enough. If you guys want more, if you'd like me to go into this in greater depth perhaps at a later time, let me know. If you like it, let me know. You know, this obviously it goes in a different direction. And certainly you could definitely then talk about, when you talk about bloodline, you could go the extra step and talk about blood type. And maybe there's advantages or disadvantages to having certain blood types. You could say certain blood types might give you unlimited access to the collective conscious state of mankind. Maybe. I don't know. You know, you'll have to think about that one. That's for you to decide. In the meantime, you guys, I'm Aubrey Force, the Modern Alchemist. This has been Ask an Alchemist, and we've been talking about time travel, and consciousness, and what it's all about. And I hope you take some time to meditate on these concepts. We're definitely going to have to talk about what meditation's about to help you out with that if any of you guys are struggling. And until then, I'll be talking to you soon. Take care.